let's just start. What the hell is inquiry?
What is inquiry?
Yeah.
So I recently released a video that was titled "Why Meditation is Not Enough" or "Meditation Doesn't Always Work." When it comes to this topic of awakening, or this topic of finding your way through the boundaries of identity, which results in a shift in identity, which we call awakening, just meditating in and of itself is not really sufficient, generally speaking. And not everybody might agree with what I'm saying, but the reason is meditation is relaxing. It's peaceful. It can calm the mind and calm the body mind. But in and of itself, it doesn't really push the ego structures. It doesn't threaten the ego structures in any way. In fact, the ego, you could say, what you take yourself to be, enjoys being relaxed. It feels good. It wants to feel good. The ego wants to feel good, of course. It wants to relieve its own suffering. What it doesn't want to do is go away. It wants to self-protect. So it's actually quite flexible. The ego is a sort of fluid. It can find itself in many different situations and find a way to be comfortable. And it can learn to be comfortable on the meditation cushion as well.
And actually, not to interrupt, but I think this is where a lot of the sort of self-help and administration, say in medicine, are like, oh, meditation, a way to... And the ego grasps onto that and says, oh, I can relax, I can be more productive, I can be more focused, I can be more centered, whatever that means, and all of that. But that is not what you would describe as, say, realization or awakening or any of that, right?
Correct. Yeah. That's a good way of saying it. I'm not against I'm not against meditation at all. In fact, I recommend it, and I would recommend a meditation practice for anyone who feels that it's relevant to them or relevant in their life. And even as a baseline or background for inquiry or for these more direct approaches that we'll talk about for awakening. So I'm all for meditation, and the book has some different ways to approach it. But to answer the question, what is inquiry? Inquiry is a way to directly get at the boundaries and the structure of your identity, because awakening really is about a transformation in identity. It's simply stated, you are not what you take yourself to be, and what you take yourself to be is uncomfortable, inherently uncomfortable. If you've gotten this far, you probably already understand that we typically say most people experience some degree of suffering, whether or not they're fully aware of it or consciously aware of it at all times. But that recognition that the suffering is there is what often starts the ball rolling or starts someone on this pathless path. So how do you get at identity when what you take yourself to be is an assumption? Like you don't question it, right? Typically, you wouldn't normally question that. In fact, we're living in the information age. We love information. We love to question things and look into things and research and compare and argue. Like we do this all day long, right? On the internet, online, social media. But it's really fascinating that we conspicuously ignore looking into the one thing,
the biggest mystery
that almost makes the most sense. Like, who am I?
Yeah.
Like, what's at the center of all that? Why am I trying to collect all that information? What am I looking for? Why am I trying to arrange my life to make myself feel better? Why do I struggle? Like, so the big questions all those arrows, if you just turn them around, they all point back to this me, right? What's actually going on with me? In fact, what am I? What is it that I take myself to be? And why is that not necessarily what I am? What am I? Who am I? Where can I find that? Where am I? Right? These very fundamental questions that might sound ludicrous, but when you actually start asking, and if you ask earnestly and you actually look at where your attention goes when you start to ask these questions, you will notice something change. You'll notice things start to shift or change, or you'll notice experiences that are uncommon in your day-to-day life. That's inquiry. That's inquiry starting to work. You're actually asking a relatively simple question in a relatively usual way, but you're directing it in a place that you usually don't look. And that starts with looking into who you are right now. And it can also be a matter of looking into what you take yourself to be, which is often thought-based, right? Because if you ask somebody, well, who are you? And they just said, oh, well, I'm Joe. I was born in this year. I have this. This is my family. This is my history. They just go through the sort of collection of thoughts and beliefs. Then you might notice, well, those are all thoughts, right? Those don't actually tell me what you are right now in this moment. You as the conscious one, you as the one that's hearing this, receiving this, communicating, interacting, and even recalling those memories. Who is that? Who or what is that? What is its nature? What is its actual nature? Can you inhabit that nature? And so the more you start to look into this, the more you realize, well, first of all, it's not a thought. It's not a thought, because the thoughts come and go. But whatever it is that I am, the experience of I am, the experience of me, or this awareness right now, it's not contingent upon thoughts. It doesn't change when the thoughts come and go, come and go, come and go. And thoughts come and go all day long, right? So you start to realize, like, oh, wait a minute. So whatever I am is not defined by any thought, belief, memory, etc. So then it becomes a little bit more mysterious, and yet you can still continue to ask, well, then, who am I? What am I? And you can turn your attention back on itself. In fact, you turn your attention back to the root of attention itself. And that's where the magic is. That's proper self-inquiry, as I would describe or teach someone to use or utilize if they want to start to investigate their identity or they're wanting to wake up. That's how I would direct them to kind of look. So the first stop is often the thoughts. Okay, well, I know I'm not this, memory, this belief, and that belief, because those change all the time, right? You could say, well, I'm a carpenter. Okay, well, what were you before you were a carpenter? What if all of a sudden you're not working in that profession anymore? Did you cease to exist and reappear as something else? Or was there something there the whole time, right? So that's like the first stop as you go, okay, well, maybe I'm the thoughts, and then you start to learn, oh, I'm not any of that. I'm not the thoughts, the beliefs, the memories. So the next stop is sort of this ineffable presence of just awakeness right now, consciousness, awareness. There's no exact word for it, but it's damn well obviously you, right? It's you. It's you listening to this. It's you who is aware of the thoughts. It's you who can be completely aware with no thoughts, even for a second, for 2 seconds, for 3 seconds. And what happens is you start to actually learn to just turn your attention back into that, and that gap can get longer until you really start to notice, oh, there is a full-on, obvious, self-validating sense of me, sense of I, without even having to say the word I internally or have a thought about it, that doesn't come or go. It's right here, right now. And the thoughts can actually start to calm down quite a bit. And it's still sort of an inquiry. It's still a question, but it's not a question you need a thought answer for anymore. So it's just a sort of fascination that turns inward onto itself. And the fascination and that sense of self are sort of seamless with one another. And you can learn to just rest in that. And that's sort of where inquiry leads you. That's kind of the second step. And then by staying there, some predictable things usually happen. It may take some time. It may take you a few days, weeks, months, even a couple of years, depending on how adamant you are to stay there. But often you'll hit a fear barrier. And this is pretty predictable. You'll actually, at some point, when the thoughts calm down enough and you just remain in that sense of I, pure sense of being right now, without grabbing the next thought at all, without entertaining thoughts, just remaining right there, not thinking about anything, you'll start to feel a fear bubbling up at some point. It's a physiologic fear response because you're letting go of all of the thought identity. So all the stuff you thought you were is literally being disentangled from identity. And the body interprets that as fear or a certain kind of, almost like a death.
Death.
Yeah. But the thing I always tell people about this is it can be even quite an intense experience. I mean, your heart rate might go way up. You might physically feel like you're physically in danger, but you're not because there's nothing happening. And I tell people, just sit through it. It's okay. It won't last forever. It'll last a few minutes usually. It might last 5 minutes. It might even last 10 minutes. Who knows? But it will go. It will pass. And often when the first time someone experiences that, even if they've heard me say this, it's so surprising because it's so intense and we're so used to believing our body, which is a good idea. If your body feels fear, you should probably pay attention, that we can't help but like back off, right? So that's the most common response people get is that they just back off and they're like, whoa, I don't know what that was. And then they go, oh yeah, that's that fear response you were telling me about. Yeah. Or I'll just remind them, hey, totally normal. It's perfectly okay. Just don't entertain thoughts during that, and notice it's a physical experience. It's a physical response the body's having, and just wait it out. It doesn't usually take that long. And most of the time, the second or third time they come across that, they just go right through it. And then this is still the beginning. What happens then is things tend to get very, very quiet. It's a very neutral experience. But it's contentless, or largely contentless, literally no thought, but just a pure sense of aware being. It's wide awake. It's not sleepy. It's not daydreamy. It's wide awake, clear, crisp consciousness.
So this is, I'm going to make one interruption, because this is where often I find myself. And you mentioned a fear barrier. Sometimes what happens here can be a boredom barrier. The mind, this is absolutely peaceful, quiet, awake awareness that you feel it, and the mind goes, boring. Come here, you got stuff to do, and can yank you back into thought. At least for me, is that something that's common or no?
Yeah, one of the handful of things that will happen, and two of them are the most common at this phase. Once you've kind of gotten through a fear barrier and you're not really experiencing that anymore, and you can lead yourself to that neutral, contentless experience of being. Right? And you're not sitting there thinking, I'm in a contentless experience of being. I'm just using those words to describe something that has no content. Okay? And it's very neutral, actually. It's not a big deal. It's not like mind expanding, universe exploding kind of stuff. It's nothing mystical. It's very, very, very present and contentless.
And it's not like everything goes black.
Nope.
It's not like your senses stop.
It's more like light. Because you could almost say consciousness, which is the stuff thoughts are made of, which is also the stuff you're made of, the sense of being you. Is kind of like light. Light can shine on something. It could shine on the book. That would be one thought. It could shine on the keyboard. That would be another thought. It could shine on the wall. You could say those are the thoughts that it's sort of shining on.
It's an illumination.
It's an illumination, but it doesn't really shine on thoughts. It actually, thoughts appear in consciousness.
Right.
But that's the analogy, right?
I see.
But because it has that illuminating nature, because it's like light, it can also just shine purely into itself. It can be nothing but a pure shining light of consciousness or awareness or beingness, or I am, pure sense of I, without being something. So it's a little bit more like light, but it is very much awake and alert, but neutral. So one of a handful of things that happens, or two of the most common. One is it's neutral, and the next thought, it's always going to be a thought that catches you, and it's you believing that thought. The next thought that'll happen is like, oh, this can't be it because it's neutral. It's so uninteresting.
Yeah.
It's so uninteresting. The mind's like, oh, this must not be it. Maybe I'll go read the book. Maybe I should look for something else. You're standing right on the doorstep of, death of the ego. And then the mind's like, oh no, this can't be it. This is definitely not it. Right. So you could say like a really subtle, simple, innocent doubt is what catches attention often there. And when I tell people that, often they'll go, oh my God, that's exactly what happens every time.
It happens to me.
And then another one is I'm bored. Like it's boredom. But I always say, well, look at what is boredom. And they're like, they don't even know what it is. I'm like, what is it? And like, well, it's a thought telling me I need to do something, but I don't know what I want to do. Okay, well, that's one thought, right? Yeah. What happens when you just say, oh, that's a boredom thought, and then go back to the neutrality? What happens then? Well, nothing happens then, right? Then you're in really good territory. You just stay there. I have no instructions beyond that because it's just a matter of staying there. I could say that there's almost a sense of you may come to a place where you could jump or let go or release, but I really hesitate to say that because people will imagine that.
Right.
They'll imagine themselves coming to a cliff, and that's not what I'm saying.
Yes.
It's an instinctual feel sometimes though, where you're like, ooh, I could really let go here, and it's kind of a big letting go in a way. But again, I don't want anyone to imagine that. It sometimes just comes upon you, and it's just a dropping
like
away.
A trust fall.
Yeah. That is the goal of self-inquiry, is that shift in identity, and it's a very simple and very small thing, but the implications are huge. Huge. It causes a shift that doesn't shift back.
So it's a potentially permanent uprooting of the sense of identity that comes about from this process of inquiry that is driven by a curious looking that does not require a conceptual answer. So, even the question, who am I, is kind of loaded with concept. Like you said, you have to get past the, oh, I'm a dad, I'm Zubin, I'm 48, I'm this. Oh, no. But that's a thought, right? So if that's who you are, but it can disappear, then can it really be you? Because there's a you there when there's none of that.
Yeah, and before you were asked to consider that thought, did you not exist?
Exactly.
Like 1 second before? Of course you were there.
Right.
Right. So.
Or in deep sleep, do you not exist?
Right.
That's a question. And so this then inquiry turns attention back on itself to the source of the questioner, really, this aware awakeness. And then you're there and you try to stay there, and then thoughts will come and try to distract you in the ways, either through fear response physiologically, almost an emotional sensation feel, or a thought response. Either you're bored or this can't be it because it's too...
Yeah. It's such a simple and quick thought, actually, the one that says, oh, this can't be it, that you don't even overtly think it.
Right.
It's just attention just turns away. It's like, okay, that's not it.
Yep.
It's like you're looking for a gem in a room, and you're like, oh, that's not the gem, that's not the gem, that's not the gem. And you find something that's so uninteresting, and you're like, well, that's definitely not it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, go back to that. That's the gem you were looking for, although it didn't look like your mind thought it was going to look. This does not look like your mind thinks it's going to look, because your mind will make it into something, and this is exactly not something. It's not something in that way.
Right.
But it is something important.
Yes. And it's intuitive. You know it when it's there. Let me ask this way. If you stay in that space of awake being, and that shift happens, however it does for you, whether it's a letting go, whether it's a spontaneous thing, whatever, and you have that fundamental awakening, that identity shift, what happens after you've had that and you do this same process? You inquire in the same way, but you've had that identity shift. How is that?
Well, you can confuse yourself. That's possible too, because you're not going to wake up to something that is already completely obvious in your experience.
Yeah.
But I will back up and mention that you said, I think you used the terminology, a permanent
uprooting.
Uprooting, okay.
Yeah.
I'll reword that a little bit. It's more like you find the plant that's there, the roots of ego, and you hack at it, and so you do cause a critical disruption in it. But it's not dead yet. What it does, the way it responds to that is it seems to die away, and you forget about it, and then it grows back like Maurice from Little Shop of Horrors. And it turns into your
feed me, Seymour.
So the ego comes back with fire, typically after an awakening. It doesn't after the honeymoon period. The honeymoon period is wonderful and all that, but so you have started a process that will end in the dissolution of ego at some point. Truly,
right?
Ego meaning the sense of being a separate self. Being someone who's struggling against life, pushing and pulling on life all the time.
Separate from life.
Separate from the physical experience you're having.
A perceiver of this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I mean by ego structures in this way.
Right.
And they will fully dissolve at some point for most people who go through this. But it takes time, and the first part feels like there is no ego. Everything's gone. Everything's free, fluid, beautiful, wonderful.
That first shift,
simple, yeah. And then you start to feel the emotions come back, the repressed emotions, the resistance patterns. It starts to come very much into consciousness. And the nice thing with this is that you have had a permanent shift in identity. You have the capacity for this now. So it's like having a foot in two different worlds, like one foot in one world, one foot in the other. That's how it feels to go through this. In a sense, the emotional pain and stuff that comes forth is even more intense. But it's more intense because all these layers of identity have been stripped away, so you can feel it directly.
Right.
And you have to feel it directly. You have to ultimately integrate all of this, and the way it gets integrated is through non-resistance. Ultimately,
you have to experience it raw without resistance,
because the resistance to it, dividing yourself internally, experientially, was what was causing all the suffering anyway. So it's an uncomfortable process. This part. At times, and other times it's not. But you will go through that and integrate it all. And so that's when we really get under or get down to the roots of identity, and at some point pluck up those roots.
Is it fair to say that resistance can only happen if there's a resistor, a separate, a sense of separation from what's happening that can push on what's happening?
Yeah, 100%. So. That's a good way of saying it. Resistance is a very interesting thing because you actually never find it, but you have to look. You have to keep looking. You have to look everywhere. it's an energy signature. It's a feeling, and you start to recognize it more and more clearly. When you're resisting anything, you know it's happening.
A friction,
A friction with life, a friction with yourself, with your emotions, with people around you, very simple life situations. And you start to pick up how it operates. And it's very strange how it operates. It operates because of the complexity of human consciousness. We can compartmentalize our consciousness in a sense. We can fracture our own identities in a lot of ways. We can have competing agendas internally. We can have views that we don't see behind. That's shadow, right? So you think, oh, I'm going to do shadow work and then integrate my shadow. The truth of it is the shadow is casting you. The shadow's running the show, and you, as you take yourself to be, you're being cast by your own shadow. And at some point, you have to get back into that shadow somehow. You have to find the material,
the unconscious
that's
material.
Unconscious, that's running the show, that's causing you to feel like yourself, but also causing you to feel like you're suffering self, and also co-opting some of your behaviors, your beliefs, and that sort of thing. And so that kind of work is really a work of love, of curiosity, fascination with what you are, who and what you are, what reality actually is, what thought is, what emotion is, what sensation is. And you really just start to deeply experience all of it. And then you learn that the reason the resistance causes suffering, or resistance is suffering, is because in the actual world, there is no such thing as resistance. That's the beauty of the honeymoon period. Is you feel the flow, you feel the spontaneity. You feel absolute spontaneity, and there's this huge release of that feeling of like, I have this huge weight of being me in life, and I'm working it, I'm managing it, I'm pushing, but it's always heavy. I'm responsible. It's just gone, and it's like, oh my God, everything is in flow, and it always is in flow.
It's always been that
I
way.
never had to struggle. I never had to suffer. So you know damn well that in natural, let's call it natural reality or unfiltered reality, there is actually no resistance. It doesn't. Nothing is resisted, and you know that intimately. You know it in your marrow now. So then, when the resistance comes back, you know it's not fully natural. It's something you're doing. You're not a guilty party. It's a habituated response to your own experiences, to your own emotions, to thoughts. But it is something that you can reverse. It's something that you can, by looking closer and closer and closer and seeing there's no agent in there actually doing it, it will soften. And at some point, it will completely relax.
It will release.
It
requires looking, bringing into the light. Again, you made the analogy of awareness as consciousness as a kind of a light, and shining that light on that material without identifying as a person who's watching it. It's kind of interesting, because there is a distinction in my experience that if I'm suffering, if I'm feeling friction, and now I can become quite acutely aware of that. Like if I view it from a viewpoint of an observer, it still hurts a lot. Like it hurts, meaning I feel the resistance even strengthen. If I dive into that which I feel is what I'm resisting, whatever the feeling, the raw feeling, the thought, the pattern of energy, whatever it is, then it almost you become that. And by becoming that, for lack of a better word, it kind of transmutes into whatever it's going to be. And that releases, and then the suffering component of it is gone. It doesn't mean the pain or the whatever that feeling is gone, like anger or shame or fear or whatever it is there. And often in me, it manifests physically. It's like, oh, there's an elephant sitting on my chest. Like, what? Why, am I dying? Do I need to go see the doctor? No, I know what this is. It's this. One day it's going to actually be a heart attack, and then I'm screwed.
Like, oh, it's just that elephant again.
Yeah, it's just the elephant. So yeah, and the inquiry. So inquiry continues, though, after awakening.
Well, yeah, I wanted to bring it back around, and you started to bring it back around when you said it's about looking. So there are three very common preconceived ideas that people carry for a long time in this process, even after awakening, that I bump into a lot. And most questions I get from people when I'm working through this stuff with them, this deeper stuff, can fall into one of these three categories. And it's a belief. It's beliefs we have. And they didn't adopt this belief through the spiritual process or the awakening process or anything like that. These beliefs came from a long time ago. They come from the way we perceive ourselves being a human being, and doership and moving through life and struggle and reward and all of it. And the three main categories are, I'm going to get something in this process. Like I need to find something, I need to add something. I'm going to lose something. I'm going to get rid of. I'm trying to get rid of something. Well, I can't remember the third one. I was going to say 3, but anyway.
You know what? It's always nice.
Yeah.
Comedy comes in 3s.
Yeah.
You always have to have a third. So just make one up.
Yeah, right.
You know,
exactly.
hot dogs.
Yeah. And hot dogs are the third one is corn dogs. No, I think the first one is kind of has 2 nuances to it, is what I was thinking in my mind. But the gist of it is that the perception you have as you're working through this stuff often sort of guides itself down into one of these categories. Like I'm going to gain something, like I'm going to find something. I'm going to find the big realization. I'm going to find my awakening again. And I kind of redirect that and say, notice that's a thought. There's nothing to find. And you know that now. After awakening, I can redirect people very easily because they get it. They energetically get it. Like, oh, of course, that's a thought. I'm not going to get anything. There's nothing to get. Right.
Yeah.
Or you're going to get rid of something. You're going to like go in there and find the pain body and kick it out. Or you're going to go in there and find resistance and kick it out. And again, I'll say, there's another thought, right? And someone will say, oh, totally. Yeah, of course. You know, and I've done this with myself 100,000 times too. So that's where the mind tends to go with this. But the truth of it is, and this is kind of usually what I say after that, is I say, this is all about clear seeing. There's nothing else. Reality is such that if you just see closely what's happening, if you see closely enough in a vulnerable way, in an honest way, in a direct way, and repeatedly until it's seen clearly, everything takes care of itself. Reality is your best friend. It's the lover that never leaves you. You will be pleased as punch how this all comes out if you just keep looking. Just keep looking at what's happening and being honest with what's not happening, which are thoughts. With your thoughts about what's happening, that's not what's actually happening.
That's not reality.
Right. And as long as you keep digging and you keep looking, everything comes out just perfectly fine. But you got to go all the way. You got to keep going. With that said, what that whole process I'm talking about is that clear seeing, looking closer at everything, emotions, sensations, resistance patterns, whether there's a self there, whether there's not a self there, what consciousness is, the nature of thoughts, all of it. If you keep looking and looking and looking, that process is what I would call the broader term inquiry. So the first part of inquiry is self-inquiry. And a lot of times like Ramana Maharishi and Nisargadatta talked about, mostly Ramana, but about self-inquiry. Who am I? But I would say that inquiry goes beyond that. After that first awakening, you can still inquire that way if you want to, if it feels relevant. But there are much more specific inquiries you can look into with things like equanimity, doership, the illusion of time, the illusion of distance, space, and division, which is non-duality. So there are specific inquiries that can be very helpful because you're looking at very subtle things now. The closer you look, the more subtle everything gets, until everything turns into subtlety, until you realize everything is a paradoxical, extremely subtle, the most obvious thing in the room experience of unfiltered reality, and it gets very difficult to talk about.
Right.
But the fixations become more and more subtle that you have to engage,
but
or
you're
looking at. Yeah, but you got to
still
keep just
looking.
looking like a microscope. That's how it ends up being. So that is what I would call inquiry, and it can be directed inquiry, or it can just be a sort of surrendered inquiry of, whatever's happening now, that's what needs to be happening. That's what I need to feel. What am I feeling? And just let attention draw down into that sensation in the body, fully inhabiting it, seeing, does it have boundaries? Does it have an inside or an outside? Does it have a name? Does it have a label? Does it have a location? Right?